Good evening, and thank you for having me as your guest author this evening. It is my pleasure to join all of you ladies in this discussion. I'd like to say a personal hello to Sylvia Drucker, Debbie Day, Diane DeFries, Phyllis Blake, Jane Bittner, Kimberly Green, Nancy Wilkes, and of course my good friend Tony Houston, since I've known since high school. You know, the first time that she came to my house, she brought her guitar with her. And after a little chit chat, I asked her to play something for me. So I was expecting something like Twinkle Twinkle Little Stars, but instead she belted out this very impressive, dynamic ballad that was entitled Man. Yes, Tony, I still remember that beautiful ballad. And it was about her boyfriend at the time, Theron, who is now her husband. They've been together for a long time, almost as long as we've been friends. So just wanted to mention that. But inside everyone, I've been told there is a story. That's my little story about Tony. But I've been carrying around a story for a long time, and it's a story that I wanted to tell, but I had to overcome some very personal challenges. It's a story about a topic that I very seldom openly talked about, and I had to overcome my fear of writing and, of course, speaking. And so I one day I sat down and I decided if I didn't write this book, who would? There's no one that can write your story better than you can. And I also thought about, well, when should I write it? And it occurred to me, if not now, then when? So I became committed to writing my story and seeing it completed into a book. So I'm letting you know that the first step to every non-writer and writer is to commit to writing your story. So once I decided I was going to commit to writing my story, I decided it was time to start looking into all the documents, photo albums, memorabilia, everything from my past, everything that my parents held, um, kept for me for some time in the future, and things told to me by my other relatives. Um, all of these things became material for my book, and I was seeing a lot of material adding up, and it was starting to almost be an impossible task to decide what was going to be included in my book and what would not be included. So the second step for a non-writer that I decided would be part of my guide would be organizing and reorganizing. And I just want to let you know that that organizing and reorganizing step took almost as long as the actual writing of the manuscript. With so much material to uh, glean from, I found it impossible to write my book like from the first word of the first paragraph in the first chapter all the way to the end. Instead, I had a bunch of little stories, and I had to figure out where they could be woven into my overall story. So I found myself a lot of times going back and forth, back in time and then fast forwarding into the future of the story where I was writing at the time. So I found myself doing a lot of, um, uh, what do you call it, future, um, let me see, what do they call it? They call it time traveling. I was doing time traveling while I was writing. So that was another part of my steps to a novice writing a book. So as I said early in my writing is a very important part. Writing lots of detail, anything that you can think of. And I got used to doing this as a child because my mother gave me my diaries, you know, the little blue books with a lock and a key, and you wrote something every day for 5 years, and then you never read them again. Well, I was used to writing things that I observed for a long time. So I continued to write stuff on anything that I could write on, and that became overwhelming too, because I would have stuff uncategorized, just anything I thought of I would write while I was illustrating for my book, while I was organizing, while I was figuring out the order of the chapters. All of these things I was juggling at the same time. So I guess juggling is also a step for non-writers writing a book for the first time. Um, so eventually, one of the ghost writers that I was writing with, which I don't recommend. It was a horrible experience, but I won't get into that. The ghostwriter suggested that I put together a video trailer. I didn't know what the heck a video trailer was, but after several reviews and comments and redos, I finally came up with a book trailer. And the book trailer started with a foundation for me, and that's where I started writing. I wrote a foundation. My book starts with a story about the Philippines, a little background about it, historical and cultural background, and then I moved to my Seminole Indian connection, which is from my mother's lineage, and I also talked about my father's military experience as a Tuskegee Airman that a lot of people don't know about, but Tuskegee Airman was consisted of thousands of soldiers, not just the few famous Tuskegee Airmen that flew the jets or the planes during World War II. There were a lot more Tuskegee Airmen, and I brought that story out in my book and associated with my father's involvement with some of the activities of Tuskegee Airmen. And I also wanted to include in my book the strong black communities that I grew up in. So I invited other members of my community to add their comments about their sentiments about our strong community in which we grew up in. So I'd just like to say that finding out, coming to terms with adoption would not have materialized if it had not been for my parents, Fred and Grace Hicks, and their taking a chance to adopt a Filipino girl. That would be me, 2 years old, a little over 2 years old, and I was left at the steps of a Catholic orphanage and only left with just a t-shirt to wear because they said the t-shirt would protect her from tuberculosis. So that's all I had, and that's all I guess I kept for quite a while. Instead of instead of my life remaining at the Catholic orphanage, my mother, and I talk about her trips to this orphanage, convinced my father that they should adopt me because they've been trying to have children. I talk about that in the book. I hope, Lisa, that you have gotten to that point, and I'm just kind of pointing it out that they took that chance to adopt me, and because of that, they saved me from an unimaginable life of poverty, limited education to the 8th grade at best, and a real probability of being stuck in prostitution or left at the mercy of Filipino streets. And at that time, back in the 50s, it was not a very pretty sight. Shortly after World War II, when things were in such disarray, it was not a pretty sight to be poor and abandoned, left to the streets. So because the Hickses adopted me, and I thank God that they did, I completed the Hicks family and flourished. After writing this book, I'd just like to share with you, Diane and Lisa and Kimberly, that I found out that many adoptees didn't have the kind of loving and caring childhood that I had. Instead, they experienced trauma mental and physical abuse, as well as neglect beyond words, and that affects them well into adulthood. I'm fortunate enough to say that I did not experience that type of childhood, but as an adoptee, I do sympathize with their stories, and I understand many of their feelings of not fitting in and of identity complexes or conflicts. In my book, Tony, I hope, although it's not intended to be a history or a psychology text of expertise, it does open discussions about topics like the Seminole Trail of Tears, which is slightly different than the Trail of Tears of the Middle Eastern state Indian removal process. You'll find that in my book also. I hope you can get through it. If you have a little difficulty understanding it, just drop me a email and I'll be glad to discuss that with you personally. My email is yelw1@aol.com, and I'll go over that again at the end. So discussing about the Seminole Trail of Tears, the impact of urban wars, early roles of blacks in the military, family, community, and the unity and strength of black family communities, the many talents of our youth, and of course, adoption family dynamics and adoption policy. In closing, I know this is very short, but hopefully we can get together again. I'd like to say in closing, this gives me an opportunity to outwardly thank my parents, family, friends, and acquaintances for giving me a world that being adopted availed me. And I also thank my family and friends who supported me through this process, and those that also contributed to the book. They all played a part in coming to terms with adoption come to life. It means so much to me that all of you have been a part of this journey, and I especially thank you, Debbie, Jane, Phyllis, Kimberly, Nancy, Lisa, Sylvia, Debbie. I can't thank you enough for making this special day another part of this journey. Look at Kitty. Did you see that? Do you see Kitty? We have so many little feral pet kitties. What a nice ending. Okay, guys, that's it for me from Florida, Oviedo, Florida. Let me know whenever you're in the area. I'll be glad to show you around. Until then, take care and have a wonderful rest of your evening.